Hi, my name's Arthur, and I wanted to talk about why I love this book so much and why I really think you should check it out, especially if you're a queer trans guy. So, this book is called We Both Laughed in Pleasure, and it's the selected diary entries of Sullivan. It is a wonderful book, and it features a tragic cover. You'll notice this is a butt. So, I can't really put this book on display anywhere as much as I would like to because I think it's like one of my favorite books that I've ever read. It's certainly one of the most impactful books. Uh, Anyways, cover aside. So who is Sullivan? Sullivan was a gay trans man who was a real pioneer. He was born in 1961 and transitioned in a time when trans gatekeeping looked vastly different from what it looks like today. In particular, the goal of transition was supposed to make people who like could conform, move off to the suburbs, and like live normal lives. And in order to to gain access to those services, you were expected to assert that you were straight. And that wasn't the case for Sullivan. He didn't want to conform, and he was gay, and he wanted to live life as a flaming femme gay trans man. And ultimately, he was able to do that. So these diary entries walk us through his life because he's the one writing them as he grows up and then moves, transitions, dates a lot of people, hooks up with a lot of people, moves off to San Francisco, and goes through various surgeries, lives a happy life as a trans guy, and ultimately, like many gay men in his time, dies of AIDS. So, despite the ending, which was like, I mean, I say ending like it's like a fictional thing, but it is literally him writing. So, which is why I feel comfortable kind of spoiling it, because how can you spoil someone's like real life? The book was joyous, and it was touching, and it was like profound. And I think that the reason why this meant so much to me is a similar sentiment to something that I've heard a trans author whose books I've read and I will review at some point on this channel, Alex Myers, talk about, which is the idea that being LGBT isn't like many other identities in that you are not born into a family of LGBT people. You have to learn the like rules of the road yourself. So like if you're Christian, if you're Jewish, if you're Black, if you're Hispanic, you grow up in a family that teaches you like this is our culture, this is our community, these are our customs, and you have a history and a legacy, and you learn all those things. But if you're LGBT, you realize you're LGBT. You're 12 years old. You're like closeted, and the first thing you think is you're scared, and the second thing you think maybe is like you don't know anyone like you, and you're alone, and have you been the only person that's ever felt this way in your whole life? And I think in particular that's a thing with trans people, because trans acceptance is a lot newer and is say a little bit is behind the gay rights movement, and people act also like trans people haven't existed for that long. And so that's something that I think I somehow in the back of my mind, even though I knew that wasn't true, I believed was that trans people are a recent thing. 2016, Laverne Cox, now they're trans people, like, as if that was the start. But it certainly wasn't. And so I think that I found that reading things and connecting to historical trans people has been a huge way to feel less lonely, because I read this and it was like it was written by me, and it wasn't. I mean, to be clear, he's very different from me. I don't use drugs, for example, and he definitely used drugs. And I have lots of different attitudes about like my life goals and all sorts of things. But there were sentiments in here that were like things that I had said to myself like alone at night, and I just thought I was the only one. And here it is written here. And in particular, what I think is so wonderful about this is that most of other trans books that are available, say, are the first trans books you'll read often are trans biographies, and those portray a very specific, and important but very specific view on transness, because that person is curating their own life. So they're talking about only the things they want to talk about. They're talking about, it was always clear. They always knew they were trans. They had to overcome adversity, but it was pretty straightforward. They followed this path. Transition made them happy. They transitioned, and then it was done, and they're happy, and that's so great. But that's not like the case for most trans people, and even those trans people writing it, right? They're ignoring the times when they felt a lot of doubt, the times when they felt scared, the times when they felt like, didn't I like wearing makeup? Wasn't that good? Like, am I gonna miss out on my female friendships? Am I gonna is this really gonna make me happy? And even when they try to add those bits in those biographies, it's hard to capture that real sentiment, like that true real fear of like, is this gonna work out? Is this gonna be what I want and what I need? And this captures it. So yeah, I guess I wanted to read like a few snippets of like parts that I don't know really hit me. So I guess one thing I thought was cool is like his diary entries start when he's quite young, and even still you can certainly tell he's trans. But it's also there are times where he totally is enjoying like living as a woman back then. So he talks about Grandmother bought me a $20 pair of boots. They're genuine black leather and go up to my knee. They have a 1-inch stacked heel, a zipper down the side. A dream come true. Jane Asher has a pair. Excellent. Wore my boots to a school, but had to change during class. I've been wearing apricot nail polish. Excellent. He just talks about loving different female outfits and feeling good and feeling cute. And then a couple entries later, he talks about some night I'm gonna dress like a boy and walk down cool streets being thought of as a boy. And he's quite young when he's writing all these things, and that just these all resonate with me, right? Where I grew up and I was I love that I think I look cute in this dress, and that's so awesome. I also think I think I'm a boy. I feel like I have the mind of a boy, but I love that I'm cute in this dress, and this sort of dichotomy of enjoying when you get the societal praise for being feminine, but then also really having these feelings that come up, and not giving them much credence. It's oh, it's just a daydream I have sometimes, and that's reflected the way he writes about that. And then later he talks about about actually starting to transition, and he only transitions, I don't know, he goes back and forth. He transitions maybe halfway through the set of these entries. And so you get a lot of time of him not yet having transitioned, living with a partner who I wasn't a huge fan of, who is a probably bisexual partner, and them kind of living in this queer-ish relationship, but him not being all the way there, and his partner doesn't really want him to transition, but does support him, but doesn't support him, and that kind of thing. That's a relatable sentiment, and then you get to the point where he's okay, no, I think I'm going to transition, but even when he's thinking about it actively, he goes back and forth, and he says, he talks about going to therapy to try to get these letters, right, and then having these revelations, and he says that no matter why I'm doing it, I want to continue doing it, and that's that. So why find out why, etc., etc. Saying I'm happy that I want to transition, that's what I want to do. This is me. Who cares why? And then he says, and now I realize my biggest hang-up is my lack of self-confidence, lack of respect for my own judgment, and my inability to make a decision that will affect my whole life. I am plagued by fear of the unknown future, though I know in my heart I will feel the same way now as I did. I know in my heart I feel the same way now as I did 10 years ago. And so, that's certainly, I could have basically written this, which is this thing of trusting yourself and how difficult that is. And then, there are, he expresses this fear of so he talks to his partner, and his partner's basically instills a lot of doubt in him, and then he says, maybe I would have fallen into plastic surgery syndrome, always blaming one thing or another for the fact I'm not a real man. I hate to face it, but it's true. I would never be entirely comfortable as a male, because in my heart I know I am nothing. I must pursue my own ideal of the perfect male-female balance and not try to oust one for another. And then at that point, then he tries to go back and is oh, I'll buy a dress, and I just think it's so cool to see someone, from the 1970s, I think at that point, maybe 80s, talk about the same things that all of us have thought at some point. And then it's amazing after he transitions to hear all these descriptions of true trans joy. So he says, he talks about, in preparing for top surgery, he says, sometimes I worry, and I know I worry too much, too seriously, that I will have the same self-doubts and uneasiness as a man as I will a woman. I worry that I will fail to find the happiness I think I will. But as I wash myself and prepare for this surgery, when I buy my new shirts, look at my breasts and think they are sexy, I know I'll come out of this a better person. It's so nice, and then after surgery he says, it's so nice to allow myself to say I am a man, to know I am a man. It's all real now. I don't have to pretend anymore. I look back on how I was before, and all the time all the wasted time that had to be. Jay was my refuge where I hid for so long. I had him and never had to face my exclusion from the rest of the world. So Jay is the partner that he has at that point left. And he talks about he talks about loving his body and how happy transition makes him feel with his body, and how even when he is dying of AIDS, how content he is to have chosen this path for himself, and how happy lower stage surgery makes him feel, and even as he has HIV that is progressing to AIDS, he pursues. So he had metoidioplasty, and then had a complication where he lost one of his balls, and he pursues getting the additional ball even though he knows that he's going to die, just because it is so important to like who he is, and that he wants to die with two balls. Like, who can blame him? And I mean, as a disclaimer, now that I've said all these positive things, this book has a ton of graphic sex in it, like a ton of graphic sex, which is kind of fun to read. I mean, you don't read many like descriptions of like, I don't know, trans guys hooking up with like basically everyone in San Francisco, and and like that's like maybe half of his entries are him talking about how beautiful he thinks various men are. Like, this man is exceptionally gay. Um, but if you're a minor, you might want to steer clear or like wait a couple years, but just know that that's what you're getting yourself into. I think this is like clued a little bit by the butt on the front of the book. But yeah, if you're up for an emotional read, to connect with a piece of trans history and a lot of graphic sex, I would just really recommend you check out the Diaries of Lou Sullivan. Rather, I guess the title specifically is We Both Laughed in Pleasure. If you have any questions about it or anything, feel free to ask them in the comments. But anyways,